new moon is in the sky.
Mission sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space.
SpaceX is launching into a new dimension.
The filing for what could be the largest IPO in history.
Buried inside the S1 filing space, X submitted to the SEC in May 2026, is something that makes the entire IPO conversation feel almost beside the point. The document describes a company planning to move the entire AI computing industry off the surface of the Earth, turn the moon into a manufacturing platform, and build a communications network so powerful it could make every terrestrial internet provider on the planet look like a relic. Everyone right now is talking about the SpaceX IPO, and understandably so. At a $1.75 trillion valuation, it is the largest public offering in American history, and the conversation has predictably zeroed in on the stock price, the valuation multiples, and whether Elon Musk is about to become the world's first trillionaire. But if even part of this roadmap becomes reality, we are not watching an IPO story. We are watching the opening chapter of something far bigger. Most companies go public to raise money for a business that already exists and already works. And in that narrow sense, SpaceX qualifies. But when we read the actual S1 document, rather than just the headlines around it, what the filing reads like, far more than a fundraising instrument, is a strategic roadmap, one that lays out a vision for the next 20 years of human civilization's relationship with space and, increasingly, with artificial intelligence. The company generated $18.7 billion in total revenue in 2025, a 33% increase year over year. Falcon 9 has become the dominant launch vehicle in the global market, having completed hundreds of missions and driven launch costs down by an estimated 90% compared to legacy competitors. Starlink has grown to 10.3 million subscribers across 164 countries and territories, with 9,600 satellites currently in orbit, generating $11.4 billion in revenue in 2025 alone. And Starship, the fully reusable heavy launch vehicle still in active development, is designed to eventually carry more than 100 metric tons to orbit per flight. The launch segment posted a $657 million operating loss in 2025, driven by $3 billion of Starship research and development. And yet the company is accelerating investment, not pulling back, because in SpaceX's strategic framing, transportation has never been the destination. Transportation is the foundation. Every dollar being poured into Starship is a dollar being invested in the infrastructure that makes everything else in the filing possible. And once we understand that logic, the three big ideas buried inside the document start to look less like corporate ambition and more like a sequenced engineering plan. One of the most striking sections of the S1 filing is the section dedicated to artificial intelligence, and specifically to what SpaceX calls orbital computing infrastructure. The global AI industry in 2026 is being constrained by two physical limitations above all others: power and heat. Modern AI data centers consume electricity at a scale that is beginning to strain national power grids, and the cooling infrastructure required to manage the heat they generate adds enormous cost and complexity to every facility that gets built. SpaceX's roadmap targets 1 gigawatt of orbital AI compute by late 2027, scaling toward 100 gigawatts a year by 2030. And the logic behind why orbit solves the problem is compelling once you work through the physics. In space, solar energy is continuous and uninterrupted by weather or atmospheric interference. Heat can be rejected directly into the vacuum of space without cooling towers, water consumption, or any of the mechanical systems that make terrestrial data centers so expensive to operate. Each AI-1 satellite carries 150 kilowatts of compute power, and a single Starship launch can carry between 30 and 50 of these satellites per flight, delivering the compute equivalent of 30 to 50 high-density GPU server racks, with no land acquisition, no power grid approval process, and no cooling infrastructure build-out required on the ground. To put the scale in terms we can actually picture, the largest terrestrial AI data center currently announced is Meta's Hyperion facility in Louisiana, designed to scale to 5 gigawatts at full build-out. SpaceX is discussing an annual deployment rate 20 times that size in orbit, powered entirely by sunlight. To manufacture the chips required to make this possible, SpaceX has publicly pitched Terafab, a proposed facility in Grimes County, Texas, described as a 100 million square foot chip manufacturing operation. The compute allocation is planned to split roughly 80% toward orbital data centers and 20% toward terrestrial applications, including Tesla's Optimus robots and autonomous vehicles. And yet, as ambitious as the orbital computing plan is, it may not be the most consequential idea in the filing. Most people who are aware of Starlink at all think of it as a finished product, a satellite internet service that works reasonably well in remote areas. The S-1 filing makes clear that this picture is significantly out of date, and that what SpaceX is actually building with Starlink looks very little like the service that exists today. Achieving fiber-like speeds depends heavily on the deployment of Starlink's third-generation V3 satellites, which are expected to begin launching aboard Starship. These larger satellites are engineered to deliver 10 times the downlink capacity of current models, up to 1 terabit of bandwidth each. 1 terabit per second is equal to 1,000 gigabits per second from a single satellite, and the V3 constellation is designed to carry multiple satellites of this capability, operating simultaneously over any given region of Earth. Beyond traditional broadband, Starlink is also rapidly expanding its mobile direct-to-cell network. By early 2026, the company had already launched over 650 specialized satellites, capable of providing text services in cellular dead zones. The longer-term roadmap extends this to voice calls and broadband data directly from ordinary smartphones, with no dish, no tower, and no local ground infrastructure required beyond a clear view of the sky. This is where the geopolitical dimension of what SpaceX is building becomes genuinely significant. Countries have historically built telecommunications capability through a long, expensive, sequential process of laying fiber, constructing towers, and negotiating spectrum rights. Starlink's direct-to-cell architecture has the potential to allow nations to bypass significant portions of that process entirely, connecting populations that terrestrial infrastructure has never reached. Starlink's revenue grew from $0.2 billion in 2021 to $11.4 billion in 2025. The S-1 filing positioned Starlink as critical infrastructure, and that distinction carries enormous implications for how governments, militaries, and enterprises around the world will relate to this company over the coming decade. Perhaps the part of SpaceX's roadmap that has received the least attention is the discussion of the moon, and specifically the seriousness with which SpaceX is now talking about not lunar exploration, but lunar industry. SpaceX plans to establish a lunar economy by building factories on the moon, using local lunar resources to manufacture millions of AI compute satellites, and then launch them into space using a lunar mass driver, a system that uses electromagnetic acceleration to propel payloads without rockets. The moon's surface gravity is approximately 1.62 meters per second squared, compared to Earth's 9.81, and its escape velocity is 2.38 kilometers per second against Earth's 11.2. The concept of a lunar mass driver has existed in aerospace engineering literature for decades, but has always faced the barrier of economics. Starship changes that calculation, because a fully reusable heavy launch vehicle capable of delivering 100 metric tons to orbit at dramatically reduced cost per kilogram is precisely the precondition that makes lunar infrastructure worth attempting. SpaceX's long-term framing envisions putting 500 to 1,000 terawatts per year of AI satellites into deep space using lunar manufacturing and electromagnetic launch systems. The Moon, in this framing, is not a destination. It is a production facility. When we step back and look at what all of these sections point toward together, a pattern emerges that reframes what SpaceX actually is as a company and what the IPO represents as an investment thesis. Transportation, communications, computing, and manufacturing are the four pillars that appear across every section of the document. Starlink moves information across a global network that no terrestrial provider can replicate in coverage or resilience. Orbital compute processes AI workloads at a scale that the Earth's power grid physically cannot accommodate without decades of grid expansion. And lunar manufacturing eventually produces the physical components of that orbital infrastructure at a cost that only becomes viable because the first three pieces are already in place. SpaceX's revenue jumped to $18.7 billion in 2025, while the company posted a loss of $4.9 billion as it continues investing heavily in Starship development and Starlink expansion. The loss figures will generate headlines, and the valuation debate will continue. But the question that actually matters is whether the infrastructure SpaceX is assembling holds together as a strategic logic, one that is internally coherent and physically achievable, regardless of whether the company is profitable today. The most interesting thing SpaceX revealed in this filing was not how much the company is worth. It was what the company wants to build: a transportation network that drops the cost of reaching orbit by a factor no prior generation of rockets could achieve, a communications network that treats the entire surface of the Earth as its coverage area, an orbital computing network designed to process AI workloads at a scale the ground simply cannot support, and eventually, industrial capability rooted not on this planet, but beyond it. Whether those ambitions fully succeed remains to be seen. History is full of grand roadmaps that outran the engineering, but what separates SpaceX from most companies making sweeping claims is how much of the foundation it has already laid. The rockets fly, the satellites are in orbit, the subscribers are paying, the pieces are already moving. The IPO will dominate the financial conversation for months. But the document beneath the IPO describes something investors and historians may ultimately find far more significant than the stock price on listing day. Not a launch company, not a broadband provider, not an AI infrastructure play. All three, connected deliberately, designed to scale together, and pointed at a future that extends well beyond the surface of the Earth. If SpaceX succeeds, the next chapter of the space race may look very different from the one that came before. Less about flags and firsts, more about factories, bandwidth, and compute. The question is no longer whether humanity builds infrastructure in space. The question is who builds it, and how soon.